Marcus Rodriguez had always been proud of his military service, but after 15 years in the Army, he'd learned to keep his mouth shut about his rapid promotions. At 35, he held the rank of colonel, but most people who met him in civilian clothes assumed he was just another grunt who'd done his time and gotten out. His sister Emma had joined the military 2 years ago, and she was stationed at Fort Braxton, about 3 hours from where Marcus lived with his wife and 2 kids. Emma had been struggling lately. Her letters and phone calls painted a picture of a toxic work environment under Lieutenant Derek Thompson, a man who seemed to take pleasure in making the lives of enlisted personnel miserable. Thompson was known for his power trips, assigning meaningless busy work, denying legitimate leave requests, and generally treating his subordinates like they were beneath him. Emma, being a private first class, was particularly vulnerable to his abuse. Marcus had advised Emma to report Thompson's behavior through proper channels, but she was afraid of retaliation. The military had strict policies against harassment and abuse of authority, but Emma worried that filing a complaint would only make things worse for her. She'd seen other soldiers who'd tried to speak up get transferred to worse positions or face trumped-up disciplinary actions. The breaking point came during Emma's birthday weekend. She'd requested leave to come home and celebrate with family, a request she'd submitted weeks in advance. Marcus had planned a surprise party, invited extended family, and even arranged for their elderly grandmother to fly in from Arizona. Emma had been looking forward to it for months, talking about how she couldn't wait to see everyone and have a break from the constant stress at base. 3 days before the planned celebration, Emma called Marcus in tears. Lieutenant Thompson had denied her leave request at the last minute, claiming there was essential training that couldn't be postponed. When Emma tried to explain that she'd already made plans and her family was expecting her, Thompson laughed in her face and told her that the military didn't care about her personal life. He assigned her to inventory duty in the supply warehouse, a job that typically took one person about 4 hours, but could easily be stretched to fill an entire weekend. Marcus felt his blood boil as he listened to his sister sob over the phone. Emma wasn't just upset about missing the party. She was breaking down under the constant pressure and humiliation. She told Marcus that Thompson seemed to single her out for the worst assignments, often making comments about how women didn't belong in the military and how she'd probably quit soon anyway. That night, Marcus made a decision. He tried to stay out of Emma's military career, believing she needed to learn to handle things on her own. But Thompson had crossed a line. Marcus began making phone calls, quietly gathering information about Lieutenant Thompson's track record and the situation at Fort Braxton. What he discovered made him even angrier. Thompson had a pattern of targeting female soldiers and newer recruits, using his authority to make their lives miserable while maintaining a clean record with his superiors. Several soldiers had tried to file complaints, but Thompson was skilled at covering his tracks and had friends in the right places who helped protect him. Marcus realized that someone needed to hold Thompson accountable, and he was in a unique position to do exactly that. The next morning, Marcus put on his civilian clothes and drove to Fort Braxton. He'd called ahead and arranged to meet with Emma during her lunch break, telling her he wanted to take her out for a meal to cheer her up. Emma was surprised but grateful for the visit, though she seemed nervous about leaving base even for a short time. As they sat in a small diner near the base, Marcus listened carefully as Emma described her daily routine and the various ways Thompson made her life difficult. She told him about being assigned to clean the same bathroom multiple times in one day, being forced to redo paperwork for minor formatting issues, and being denied access to training opportunities that could help her advance. Marcus took mental notes, his anger growing with each story. He'd served in the military long enough to know the difference between legitimate discipline and harassment. Thompson's behavior was clearly over the line, but Marcus needed to be strategic about how he handled the situation. After lunch, Marcus asked Emma if she could give him a tour of the base. She hesitated, worried about what Thompson might say if he saw her with a civilian visitor, but Marcus convinced her that it would be fine. They walked around the base, with Emma pointing out various buildings and facilities while Marcus observed everything with a trained eye. As they passed the administrative building, Marcus spotted Lieutenant Thompson walking toward them. The man was exactly what Marcus had expected: young, arrogant, with the kind of swagger that came from wielding power over people who couldn't fight back. Thompson's uniform was pristine, his posture perfect, and his expression showed clear annoyance at seeing Emma with someone he didn't recognize. Thompson approached them with a scowl, his voice dripping with authority as he demanded to know who Marcus was and what he was doing on base. Emma started to stammer an explanation, but Marcus stepped forward and calmly introduced himself as Emma's brother. He kept his voice respectful but made no effort to appear intimidated. Thompson looked Marcus up and down, taking in his civilian clothes and casual demeanor. The lieutenant's expression shifted to one of dismissive contempt, as he clearly assumed Marcus was just another ordinary citizen who didn't understand military discipline. Thompson made a show of checking his watch and told Emma that her break was over and she needed to report back to duty immediately. Emma started to protest that she still had 20 minutes left, but Thompson cut her off sharply. He ordered her to report to the supply warehouse and begin inventory, making it clear that he expected her to work late into the evening. Then he turned to Marcus with a condescending smile and suggested that he leave the base so Emma could focus on her military duties. Marcus felt his jaw clench, but he maintained his composure. He gave Emma a reassuring hug and told her he'd see her soon. As he walked away, he could hear Thompson lecturing Emma about bringing unauthorized visitors to the base and how she needed to learn to prioritize her military responsibilities over her personal relationships. That evening, Marcus spent hours researching Fort Braxton's command structure and protocols. He made several phone calls to contacts he'd maintained throughout his military career, gathering information about the base's leadership and the proper channels for addressing officer misconduct. He also began documenting everything Emma had told him, creating a detailed timeline of Thompson's harassment. The plan that formed in Marcus's mind was elegant in its simplicity. He wouldn't need to pull strings or make threats. He would simply use the military's own system against Thompson, but he'd do it in a way that would expose the lieutenant's true character to everyone who mattered. Marcus spent the next week preparing. He reached out to other soldiers who'd served under Thompson, many of whom were willing to share their own stories of mistreatment. He gathered evidence, documented patterns of behavior, and built a case that would be impossible to ignore. But more importantly, he planned a confrontation that would reveal Thompson's arrogance and disrespect for military protocol. The following Friday, Marcus put on his dress uniform for the first time in months. The sight of himself in the mirror brought back memories of ceremonies and formal occasions, but today the uniform served a different purpose. Every ribbon, every medal, every insignia told a story of service and sacrifice that Thompson would never understand. Marcus drove to Fort Braxton with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He'd served his country with honor, earned his rank through merit and dedication, and now he was going to use that authority to protect his sister and hold a corrupt officer accountable. The confrontation ahead would be swift and decisive, but the impact would last much longer. As he approached the base gates, Marcus felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. He'd been in combat situations where the stakes were life and death, but this felt just as important. Thompson had abused his power for too long, and it was time for him to face the consequences. The guard at the gate snapped to attention when he saw Marcus's uniform and rank insignia. Marcus presented his military ID and explained that he was there on official business. The guard's respectful demeanor was a stark contrast to how Thompson had treated him the week before, and Marcus knew that contrast would be even more pronounced when he encountered the lieutenant. Marcus made his way to the administrative building, his steps measured and confident. He'd called ahead and arranged a meeting with the base commander, but first he wanted to have a conversation with Lieutenant Thompson. The timing was perfect. Emma had mentioned that Thompson usually spent Friday afternoons in his office, catching up on paperwork and preparing for the weekend. Marcus found Thompson's office and knocked on the door. When the lieutenant called for him to enter, Marcus stepped inside and came to attention. Thompson looked up from his desk, and Marcus watched as the man's expression shifted from casual disinterest to shock, and then to barely concealed panic. The lieutenant had clearly recognized Marcus from their previous encounter, but now he was seeing him in full dress uniform with colonel's insignia clearly visible. Thompson's face went pale as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He jumped to his feet and began to render a salute, but his hands were shaking so badly that he could barely complete the gesture. Marcus returned the salute crisply and then fixed Thompson with a steady gaze. He introduced himself formally, giving his full name, rank, and unit designation. Thompson's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, clearly struggling to process the situation. "Sir, I didn't realize," Thompson stammered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Marcus let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. His voice was calm and controlled, but there was an unmistakable authority behind it that made Thompson shrink back. Marcus explained that he was conducting an investigation into reports of officer misconduct, and that he wanted to discuss Thompson's treatment of the soldiers under his command. Thompson's face went through several color changes as he realized that his harassment of Emma had caught the attention of a superior officer. He tried to explain his actions, claiming that he was just maintaining discipline and that some soldiers needed firm guidance. But his explanations sounded weak and unconvincing, especially when Marcus began asking specific questions about Emma's denied leave request and excessive duty assignments. As the conversation continued, Thompson's desperation became increasingly apparent. He seemed to realize that his career was hanging in the balance, and he began making promises about changing his approach and treating his soldiers more fairly. But Marcus had heard enough empty promises from corrupt officers over the years to know that Thompson's words were meaningless. Marcus informed Thompson that he would be conducting interviews with other soldiers who'd served under his command, and that a formal investigation would be launched if the evidence supported the allegations. Thompson's face crumpled as he realized that his pattern of harassment was about to be exposed to the entire base. The meeting ended with Thompson rendering another shaky salute as Marcus prepared to leave. But before he walked out the door, Marcus delivered a final message that would stay with the lieutenant for the rest of his career. He reminded Thompson that every soldier, regardless of rank, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, and that officers who abused their authority would be held accountable. As Marcus left Thompson's office, he could hear the lieutenant slumping back into his chair, probably wondering how he was going to explain this situation to his superiors. But Marcus's work wasn't finished yet. He had a meeting with the base commander, and he intended to make sure that Thompson's misconduct was properly addressed through official channels. The meeting with Colonel Patricia Williams, the base commander, went exactly as Marcus had hoped. Williams was a seasoned officer who took allegations of harassment seriously, and she listened carefully as Marcus presented his evidence and explained the pattern of behavior he documented. She thanked him for bringing the matter to her attention and assured him that a full investigation would be conducted. Marcus also made sure to mention the broader implications of Thompson's behavior, pointing out that his treatment of female soldiers could create legal liabilities for the base and undermine morale among the troops. Williams nodded grimly, clearly understanding that this was a serious matter that needed to be addressed quickly and thoroughly. After the meeting, Marcus went to find Emma. She was in the supply warehouse, mechanically counting inventory with a defeated expression on her face. When she looked up and saw her brother in full dress uniform, her eyes widened in shock. Marcus could see the exact moment when she realized what had happened, and her expression shifted from confusion to amazement to something approaching awe. Marcus gave Emma a reassuring smile and told her that things were about to change. He explained that he'd spoken with both Thompson and the base commander, and that an official investigation was being launched. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief rather than frustration. As they walked out of the warehouse together, Marcus could see other soldiers stopping and staring. Word traveled fast on military bases, and by now everyone knew that Lieutenant Thompson had been visited by a colonel who was asking questions about his conduct. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and Thompson's reign of harassment was coming to an end. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Multiple soldiers came forward with stories of Thompson's abuse, and the pattern of harassment was impossible to ignore. The lieutenant was formally reprimanded, stripped of his command, and transferred to a position where he'd have minimal interaction with enlisted personnel. But the real victory wasn't Thompson's punishment. It was the change in atmosphere on the base. Soldiers who'd been walking on eggshells suddenly felt free to speak up and report problems. The toxic environment that Thompson had created was replaced by one where people felt respected and valued. Emma flourished in the new environment. Without Thompson's constant harassment, she was able to focus on her training and development. She received the advanced training opportunities she'd been denied, and her performance evaluations improved dramatically. Within 6 months, she was promoted to specialist, and her confidence returned. Marcus never told Emma about the specific details of his confrontation with Thompson, but she didn't need to know. She understood that her brother had used his position and experience to protect her, and that was enough. The experience had taught her that sometimes the system worked, but only when people were willing to stand up and demand accountability. The story of Marcus and Lieutenant Thompson became something of a legend on Fort Braxton. New soldiers would hear about the time a colonel showed up in civilian clothes, and nobody recognized him until it was too late. The tale served as a reminder that respect should be given based on character and merit, not just on appearances or assumptions. For Marcus, the experience was a reminder of why he'd chosen to serve in the military in the first place. It wasn't just about following orders or maintaining discipline. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves and ensuring that power was used responsibly. His intervention had saved Emma's career and potentially prevented Thompson from destroying other soldiers' lives. Thompson, meanwhile, spent the rest of his military career in obscurity, never again holding a position of significant authority. The experience had taught him a hard lesson about the consequences of abusing power, though whether he truly learned from it remained questionable. What mattered was that he was no longer in a position to harm the soldiers under his command. The broader impact of Marcus's actions extended beyond just one base or one corrupt officer. His willingness to stand up and demand accountability sent a message throughout the military community that harassment and abuse would not be tolerated. Other officers took note, and some began to reconsider their own behavior and treatment of subordinates. Marcus returned to his civilian life with a renewed sense of purpose. He'd proven to himself that his military service had given him tools and authority that could be used to make a real difference in people's lives. The experience had also strengthened his relationship with Emma, who now saw him not just as her older brother, but as someone who would always have her back. Years later, when Emma had advanced to sergeant and was leading her own team of soldiers, she would tell them about the importance of treating people with respect regardless of their rank or position. She'd learned that lesson the hard way, but she'd also learned that there were people in the military who would stand up for what was right when it mattered most. The story of Marcus and Lieutenant Thompson became a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions about people based on their appearance or civilian status. It reminded everyone that rank and authority should be earned through merit and used responsibly, and that those who abused their power would eventually face consequences. In the end, Marcus's quiet intervention had achieved everything he'd hoped for and more. He'd protected his sister, held a corrupt officer accountable, and helped create a better environment for all the soldiers on the base. The confrontation had lasted only a few minutes, but its impact would be felt for years to come.